Welcome to the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast. Today we are talking about studying for the MBE, specifically when you are having issues knowing and applying the law. Your Bar Exam Toolbox hosts are Alison Monahan and Lee Burgess. That's me. We're here to demystify the bar exam experience so you can study effectively, stay sane, and hopefully pass and move on with your life. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. Alison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on your favorite listening app and check out our sister podcast, the Law School Toolbox podcast. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on barexamtoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started.
Welcome back to the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast. Today we're strategizing about how to resolve problems you're having on the MBE, specifically when you're struggling with the law. You know, this is a very common problem, and I think people don't really recognize it. They just sort of think, you know, I'm not good at multiple choice. I'm just bad at the MBE. And it's like, well, actually, I think a lot of your problems derive from the fact that you don't actually know the detailed nuances of the law in a way that you need to.
Yeah, and I think that part of that happens because when they are doing practice or doing practice exams, a lot of people don't evaluate why you're actually getting questions wrong and also why you're getting them right.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a tendency sort of to be like, well, I looked at the answer choices, and I got my answer right or wrong, and then maybe you skimmed the explanation. But that's really not digging deeply enough into this problem. I mean, again, it's kind of the difference between reading a book and writing a book. Like, oh, I see where I missed it. Okay, moving on to the next one. You got to go deeper.
Right, exactly. So, one of the things that we do with our tutoring students is we have this table set up, and we ask people, not only to evaluate, if you got a question right or wrong, but why you got it right, why you got it wrong.
Well, and also how confident they were going in. Because if you have 0% confidence in your answer, but you got it right, that's not really that helpful.
Right.
You guessed.
You guessed.
You got lucky.
Yeah. And, I think that a lot of times people don't want to really own the fact that they are struggling with the law, because the law and the MBE can seem very intimidating because it's just gnarly, nitpicky, nuanced law about stuff that most people don't like to study.
Yeah. And, we did this recently when we did the Practice of the Week program, which is our MBE practice video questions. We went through individual questions and we learned a lot. I think we even did a whole podcast about sort of how specific your knowledge has to be. But if you do have that specific level of knowledge, every single one of these questions has an obvious answer.
Right. So I think the reality is, though, if you do some of this self-evaluation and you realize that the law is the problem, then I think a lot of people don't know what to do.
Right. It's like, well, do I just go watch videos?
Right.
No.
Terrible idea.
Not a good idea.
Not a great idea.
That is not the level of legal knowledge you need. That might be what you need for an essay.
Maybe.
I mean, you can watch a video that gives you the overview of the law and, goes into some of the details and whatever, and you take something away from that. You might be able to write a passing essay based on that. You cannot necessarily answer specific MBE questions on that topic successfully.
Yeah, I think that that's so true. So, you have to say, okay, I'm struggling with the law, so now what do I do? Because this law seems really complicated, but it's not complicated. It's just testing
annoying.
The details. Yeah, it's
annoying.
Testing these little nuances and these
not
pain
hard.
points. No, it's not harder than any of the other law. It's just painful. And a lot of the stuff that you test is stuff that nobody likes to study, like prior bad acts or evidence.
Although I'm just having flashbacks to race notice jurisdiction versus
mortgages.
Notice versus race. And I don't remember what those things mean. When I took the MBE, I knew what they meant.
Right. Yeah.
Because I had to, because they were going to give you questions on that. And if you can't remember the difference between a notice or a race notice, you're going to miss that question.
Yeah.
You have to learn it.
Yeah. So I think one of the things you can think about is if you're really, let's say evidence is a pain point for you and you are really, struggling with evidence and you are evaluating why you are missing questions and it is a knowledge of the law problem, I think you can come at it very strategically. So let's set aside that we're not going to spend time listening to lectures. They have this cool thing called the frequency analysis. You can go on the National Conference of Bar Examiners website and they will you can download these subject matter outlines that include kind of this frequency list of like what's most heavily tested.
Oh, it's super useful.
It's super useful.
And I remember finding this actually when I was studying for the bar, and it made me feel better.
Yeah.
Because you just kind of look at it and you're like, oh, okay. So there's a limited universe, and this is what the universe looks like, and this is kind of how you weight it. Okay.
Right.
Like, I can deal with this. This is something I can handle.
Exactly. And, we've turned these into tables, so it's easier for our students to kind of deal with this information and implement this information. But what that information will tell you is, hey, hearsay is going to be a huge chunk of my multiple choice questions.
Like relevance.
Right. And so, I think that one of the things that you want to remind yourself is all of these questions in this law is not created equal. But if you're struggling with hearsay or evidence, you have to do a deep dive. And so that deep dive needs to be done in a couple of ways. I think you need to have good, solid outlines that you're studying from, but you also have to really practice applying that law and learn from the bar questions. I think that's one of the other things we learned when we did our Practice of the Week program was you can really learn from these questions if you slow down and really let them teach you. But most of us don't slow down. When I was studying for the MBE, I would definitely just go through and be like, oh, did a set of 30, got 7 wrong. Moving on. I never, and maybe I looked at why I got them wrong, but I never wrote down the law that I missed. I never tracked the areas of law that I was missing. I never did any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And I think for some people you can get away with that. I mean, for me, I remember approaching the MBE really as a kind of puzzle. Mm-hmm. And I tried to think about, given that I did have limited time, even when the first time I took the bar, because I was, working and studying even then. And I sort of thought, okay, I need to figure out what I'm getting wrong so that I can start getting that right. Mm-hmm. And for me, I'd had a kind of insane professor who taught me the Fourth Amendment and, thought the police literally could do whatever they wanted. And there were a lot of questions about, search and seizure type of stuff. And I literally missed every single one for a while until I kind of realized wait, I do not know this law. Mm-hmm. My impression of what this law is 100% incorrect. So I had to sit down with that law and really say, okay, I need to retrain myself on this because obviously I don't know it.
Right.
And then I started getting more right.
Yeah. And, there's kind of a vulnerability that comes with that.
Yeah. You're like, what do you mean I don't know this? Right. And it's in some way you have that reality check of wow, I really do not know this law.
Yeah. And so I think, the other thing you can do, especially if you're using a tool like Adaptabar, is you can use their statistics and their analyses to really help you do this deep dive. So, if you do, I think you have to do at least, wasn't it 100 or 200 to start getting some of this?
Oh, I think it's more like 500 or 700 or something. It's funny, they want a lot of questions.
Right, to get some of this analysis, but you're going to start to see these pain points. And so, when you get that information, again, it becomes, what are you going to do with it? So the nice thing about using a tool like Adaptabar or a book like A Manual, Strategies and Tactics, where you can do this subject specific practice, is that you can sit down and say, okay, I'm going to really do some evidence. And you have to go into it with the intention that you're going to learn from those questions and kind of walk through them. And I think utilizing a program like our Practice of the Week program, where we kind of start this process for you, can be a nice starting point.
Yeah, and we give you a sample question after you've done one on a topic to test, because we want you to actually test, do I really understand more about this law now?
Right.
Okay, you've seen us do one question. Now can you apply something and do that same topic? Because I think sometimes what happens is people forget to think, when they're trying to learn this law. Because there's just, they think, oh, there's so much. I'm so rushed. I just have to memorize these outlines. And something like hearsay, I think, is a great example. Because hearsay is, in some ways, not that complicated.
Right.
However, if you don't really understand it, you're going to be flailing. Mm-hmm. Because there are these things, and it's the same thing. It's the same test. It's like, is it an out-of-court statement of a declarant submitted for the truth of the matter asserted? Mm-hmm. And people forget that last part. And so they go down all these weird pathways. And then you're like, this is not even hearsay.
Right.
We're using it for a different reason. That's what they're testing you on. You have to think about this.
Yeah, it's so true. And it was interesting. I was talking to one of the tutors on our team about working with a student on the multiple choice, and we were talking about how they'd been spending their time. And, one of the things she mentioned was she's like, we were walking through MBE questions, and then it just became very clear that in this area of civil procedure, this student didn't know the law, like didn't learn it correctly in law school, hadn't relearned it for the bar correctly. And then we just decided that it was time to sit down and review this law to make sure that the student was able to, understand it. And then all of a sudden they went back to the questions and things started to fall into place.
Yeah, I think that's the point at which things click. Like I remember that kind of clicking on the Fourth Amendment. And for me, like there was that momentary instinct of getting to the wrong answer, but then I stopped myself and I thought through the law I had relearned and was like, oh, yeah, no, I'm totally wrong. As I expected, I need to pick the different answer.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think sometimes people, they don't want to do kind of the harder stuff. So it's tempting just to practice either questions you're already pretty good at or just do mixed sets of things. And then you feel like, oh, I'm doing okay. But if you're consistently missing the same topics, that's something you need to address because that's where your area of improvement really is.
And I think the other thing that's for repeat takers is that the bar, when they give you your scores, they give you these really weird numbers,
which are I'm realizing like more and more
super pointless.
They're almost meaningless.
Yeah,
because people get real. So if you've never seen one of these lists, what it is it's the 7 topics of the MBE, and they give you a percentage, and that percentage for each one tells you essentially what percentage of the people taking that exam have done worse than you in that topic area. So people get really hung up on this thing. Well, I had 10% here and 20% here, so that means I did really terribly in this, but not in. All that's really telling you is that it's a curve. I mean, it's like
this is where you fell in the curve.
It's where you fell in the curve, and it doesn't mean that you actually did better in these other topic areas. Maybe everybody did terribly in evidence, and you did slightly better than average, and everyone did really well in contracts, and you did slightly worse than average.
Right.
I mean, it's kind of useful if you see these really huge disparities to be like, oh, what happened in torts? You got 1% were worse than you. Okay, you probably did pretty poorly.
Yeah.
But it's not the same as doing something like Adapt-A-Bar, where it's literally the percentage that you personally are getting correct or not correct in a topic.
Yeah. And one of the things that I think a lot of students, even if they're using a tool like Adapt-A-Bar, won't do is, really weekly, you should be checking in on these numbers, to give yourself these benchmarks. Because I think that's another thing that sometimes happens is you purchase this tool and you're like, it has all these great reporting capabilities. And we do this with our tutoring students. We ask them to generate these reports and send them to us. And a lot of people don't even appreciate that it has reporting capabilities.
Right.
But from those reports, we can say, wow, it really looks like you're struggling with civil procedure. Let's figure out why that is. And you can pivot and change. I think a lot of people do kind of get caught up in this idea of just doing these practice sets and not evaluating your work. Because, we talk a lot about practice, self-evaluation, getting feedback on the writing, but, there's a lot of self-feedback to be given on the multiple choice as well.
Right. And I talk to a lot of people like, well, I'm just bad at Civ Pro. I'm like, okay, well, I'm sorry. You need to get better at it.
Right.
I don't know what else to tell you.
I'm kind of bad at Civ Pro too, but, you gotta
I don't like property law, but I still had to sit down and memorize all those weird terminologies and know what a whatever right of re-entry or reverter or whatever they were called. I knew that information at some point because I had to know it for the MBE.
Right.
Sometimes people just give up on these topic areas, and in reality, that's almost the worst thing you can do because that's actually where your greatest opportunity for improvement is.
And sometimes when you sit down and look at somebody's MBE scores, there are definitely students, who have a huge mountain to climb with their MBE scores. But sometimes, we talk to a lot of folks that, let's say you're on the 200-point scale, you need 5 more points, 10 more points.
Yeah.
You're not it's not
a disaster.
It's a disaster. But when you're looking for 5 or 10 more points, those 5 or 10 more points could just be, hey, I never learned the rule against perpetuities, or I never learned the mortgages law. Well, those could be your 5 or 10 points.
Yeah, exactly.
We're not talking about that many questions. It's on a curve. It's not that many more questions you need to get right.
No, and I think in a way it's almost hopeful if you can just pinpoint those few areas of the law and maybe even try to find 1 or 2 rules or areas in each of the topic areas. If you can find 2 areas in each of the 7 topics where you're not so solid on the law, that's only 14 legal rules you need to know. You can do that.
Right. And sometimes it is really just sitting down with these almost little mini topics. And so one of the other things that I think can be nice to see, either kind of an attack sheet type outline or even the subject matter outlines that the National Conference of Bar Examiners provide, is because they're very clean. They're just like lists of issues. And I think it can be nice to kind of like hold that very clean document and say, okay, like torts, I'm good on negligence.
Right. But maybe I'm like strict liability. I kind of did, maybe product stuff. I kind of forgot a lot of that. Maybe I need to look at that.
Maybe I need to look at that. And so it's like, okay, well, how are you going to look at that? Well, you can just take that section on strict liability and a scratch paper outline next to it and make those the headers. It's like strict liability. You can have, dangerous animals.
Right. I always go for the wild animals.
I always go for the wild animals. And then you have, ultra hazardous activities, and then you've got strict liability around products. Okay, so maybe I've got these 3 sections. And then it's like, okay, what's my animals rule? Right. And that you just need to know. And then it's like, well, what's my, abnormally dangerous activity rule? Well, okay, that was done. Now maybe it's products. Maybe that's really the pain point. So then you have to sit there and you need to like go to your outlines and maybe make yourself, a little attack sheet just on that subject. Now, I don't think it would take more than an hour to figure that out.
No, absolutely not.
I mean, if an hour.
Yeah.
I just talked about it and it was like a minute.
Right. I mean, basically, you can go to like your Smart Bar Prep outline and like look at that section. It's probably going to be under a page.
Yeah. And so, like writing it out yourself, I was just circulating articles to our team last night about, again, more of the science that's come out this year about the importance of handwriting as a method of learning. So it's like, just get out your pen, get out your bar prep outline, make yourself a table, wrestle with the material, and then if you still don't understand it, find someone to explain it to you.
Right, exactly. And then, you kind of want to, once you're like, okay, I feel like I'm pretty confident about this, then do some practice questions.
Yeah.
See if you can apply it.
Right. And if you can't apply it, then you got to go either back to the law or you got to go get somebody to explain it to you. I think that's the thing, is like, and it doesn't have to be a tutor. I mean, of course, like, our tutors can sit down and explain it to you because they are very comfortable with all of this law. It could be a friend. It could be a friend, and you're like, I am struggling with strict liability as it applies to products. Like, do you understand this? Can you explain it to me? Can we go to lunch? Can we talk about it? Sometimes that might make the difference, but ignoring it is not the solution.
No, just being like, I'll never learn this area. Like, this is all learnable.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, none of this is impossible.
No.
I mean, and, you're going to forget things, of course. And I think one of the things you want to do, too, is once you're feeling solid in an area and you have that handwritten outline or whatever it is, don't throw that in the trash.
No.
No. You want to be reviewing that, reviewing it probably every week or so. Maybe you keep a folder of, the stuff you've struggled with and you go back and look at it, because that spaced repetition is what's going to get this in your brain.
Mm-hmm. I just found my bar binder cleaning out a closet the other day, which has all of these handwritten like outlines and notes to myself, which is like kind of intense, but it is interesting to, see how, doing that focused practice on the weak areas of the law is really how you solve these problems. And I think that this is the heavy lifting. We talk about this one post on our Bar Exam Toolbox site all the time. But it's,
I know what post you're going to talk about.
You just already know. But it's, make sure you're doing things to make yourself uncomfortable. And I think that a lot of the reason why people don't approach the MBE in this way is because it's no fun
to
horrible. Study stuff that you aren't good at. And it's terrible to get questions wrong over and over again.
Well, and I was talking to someone recently who had gotten Adaptive Bar and I guess didn't really realize that this is kind of what they were doing if you just let them feed you the questions. And so he actually found out about this from our podcast where we talked to the Adaptive Bar person, that they were feeding him questions, progressively as he studied, more and more questions of the type he was getting wrong. And so he was getting really demoralized because he didn't realize that's what was happening. He's like, my scores are going down. So if you're using Adaptive Bar and your scores start dipping, it might not actually be because they're dipping. You might just be getting harder questions that you're not so good at.
We'll link to that podcast episode so you can listen.
He was like, they really ought to tell you that, because I was like freaking out.
I think they do tell you that.
I know. I was like, I'm pretty sure there's probably some piece of information you didn't read there, but yeah, okay. I get your point. They should make that clear to you.
So, again, if you're feeling super overwhelmed or you're in a commercial bar program and you are just drowning on the MBE, and remember, your goal is like 70 to 75% accuracy.
Right.
If you are consistently getting 60 to 65%,
that is not
good enough. That is just not good enough.
It might seem pretty close,
but it's not good enough.
No, and you're going to be at the very low part of that curve.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I really think you want to start being honest with yourself. And if things, let's say you get to, the month of the exam. So if it's like the beginning of February or the beginning of July and things are not moving in the right direction, if you have stalled, that is a great opportunity to do this deep dive because it is not too late to fix things, but doing the same thing over and over again is the definition of insanity.
Yeah, just taking more questions to try to improve your results is it's just not, maybe it'll help a little bit, but it's not going to help as much as identifying these areas where you're flailing and fixing them.
Yeah.
That was always my strategy. I was like, this is not going to be fun. It's going to be absolutely brutal to keep doing the questions that I'm getting wrong, but that is where I can make improvements in my score the fastest.
Yep, absolutely. So one other thing I wanted to raise on this topic, because I do think that, it can be kind of tricky when you are coming at this with either anxiety issues or learning differences, to work that into that study. Because I think that if you, especially for folks with anxiety, but also folks with things like ADHD and things like that, it is really important to think about how to, make the MBE work with your own individual situation. So if you have extended time, your MBE will be 4.5 hours long. Wow. Each set.
Yeah.
Each set will be 4.5 hours long. So you also need to practice and get comfortable with, the stamina of having to do it for that length of time. The other thing that I have seen students struggle with is if you do take any sort of medication, you should talk to your doctor. We're not doctors. I'm not giving medical advice. But because sometimes there's a time lapse for those meds. And I have seen students struggle with the way that the MBE is tested and how those meds kind of ebb and flow. And so you wanted to, set aside time because sometimes the issues, you might be doing better until you take a practice exam and then it all falls apart. So that's another just issue I wanted to raise. If you are in that camp and you are taking meds to help you focus or to help control anxiety and you're finding that that's not working for you, please, sooner than later, go have a conversation with your doctor about how to shift that, because I've had students who just changed the time that they took the meds and that just changed their whole experience with the test.
No, I can see that because so much of the MBE is really just about being able to maintain that consistent focus and keep moving at a reasonable rate of speed and all these things. So I think that's hard for everyone, but certainly there are people that's even harder for, and I think anyone can benefit from considering if it behooves them, halfway through a 3-hour set in the actual exam to stand up and get some water and do a few jumping jacks and then come back more focused. I'm always one of those people who sits on the aisle in the airplane because I can't sit for that long and just go kind of nuts. So I had to get up during the exam. Yeah. It was like that was 3 minutes off of my overall timetable, but it definitely, helped me refocus.
Yeah. I've even had students do breathing exercises, meditation exercises they memorized, like anything.
Qigong.
Yeah.
Whatever
it might be. You can practice these things to also help with your focus. So,
unfortunately, none of those will really help if you don't know the law.
Right. Exactly. But to circle back on the topic, what we, as some final thoughts, and then Alison, I'll let you share yours. I just want people to really sit with the MBE and try and spend some time figuring out why you are struggling with it. And I think that is just a question that is not often answered by students. They just assume that they're bad at that portion of the exam. And it is still testing knowledge of the law and application of the law to facts. So somewhere there's a breakdown, and you need to figure out what that breakdown is so you can do targeted, focused practice. And if it's the law, unfortunately, you need to study that law and keep doing those questions and tracking why you're getting them wrong, because eventually you'll understand the law and it will get easier.
Yeah, I think that's such a key point. For me, the MBE is really all about your strategy of studying.
Yeah.
And what are you spending your time on? Are you spending it effectively? Are you really focusing on the things that are going to move the needle here? And it's interesting because sometimes people say, I just run out of time and all these things. And they've actually done studies where they basically let people take this test, as in a research setting, I think without time constraints or with like twice as much time. And so essentially not time constrained. And they really found it doesn't actually matter.
Yeah.
The people who know the law are able to get the questions right, whether they have half as much time or twice as much time. And the people who don't. It's not going to help you to have more time if you don't know what you're talking about.
Yep.
That's just the harsh reality. So, if this is a portion of the test that is not your strong suit, I think that is one of those things to really start to get serious about is what legal knowledge am I actually missing?
Yeah. And, you can learn this part of the test too.
Yeah.
You can.
It is a constrained body of knowledge.
It is. Yeah. All right. Well, with that, we are out of time. I want to take a second and remind you to check out our blog at barexamtoolbox.com, which is full of helpful tips to help you prepare and stay sane as you study for the bar exam. You can also find information on our website about our courses, tools, and one-on-one tutoring programs to support you as you study for the UBE or California Bar. If you enjoyed this episode of the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We'd really appreciate it, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you are still in law school, you might also like to check out our popular Law School Toolbox podcast as well. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Alison at lee@barexamtoolbox.com or Alison@barexamtoolbox.com, or you can always reach us via the website contact form at barexamtoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.